This time on Colores. New Mexico photographer Robert Christensen captures the portraits of buildings that reflect the rugged and independent spirit of New Mexico.
The ones that look back at me are the ones that are meaningful to me.
Paper cutting artist Andrea Martin shares how her art practice is based on her background in the science of biology.
I look at patterns in nature. Patterns in nature really fascinate me.
After some tough times, artisan Steve Cinnamon is saved by creating an unusual musical instrument, the cigar box guitar.
It gave me a feeling of worth, creativity, and it was a lot of fun.
Arnold Alanis is enamored with the changing seasons and creates works revolving around the ever-changing foliage and scenery.
I've always tried to convey the feeling of awe and solitude that I get in the scenes that I paint.
It's all ahead on Colores. New Mexico photographer Bob Christensen captures the many faces of New Mexico's buildings.
I never set out to document old architecture around New Mexico. I stopped and photographed buildings that I reacted to or responded to internally. And if I could get a print that would bring that out, then it was a success. If I couldn't, then it was just another picture of another building. To me, these photographs are all individuals. I know if you look at them at a group, there's a consistency of perspective and tonality and all, but to me each building is an individual, and I can remember standing there taking the picture of every one of those. After my GI Bill ran out, I got a job driving a produce truck for a greenhouse down in Tomei. And that took me all over the state, and I have to admit, at some point I started cheating on my routes a little bit and getting creative with getting from point A to point B just so I could go through different small towns and take different routes. Paul Strand was one of the photographers who really influenced me. He did a lot of portraiture. In fact, he worked in New Mexico a lot. He said something to the effect that a good portrait leaves the viewer feeling as though they know the subject. They have met them, even though they never have met them. In other words, a portrait is going to say something about that person more than just what they look like. And that's what I'm trying to do with these buildings. I've photographed an awful lot of buildings, and the ones that look back at me are the ones that are meaningful to me. I think these places, as much as anything, reflect the personalities of the people who made them. It's a lot different now with all the building codes. Buildings are starting to take on a similarity that you just lose that kind of character. gas station down in Dexter, Wortman Super Service. And it was run by John Wortman for a lot of years. I took the photograph in 1977. From what his son says, one day he decided he was going to retire, so he closed up same as always and went home and never went back. Well, back in the mid to late 90s, Bud took me over to that gas station, and we walked around inside, and it was like stepping through a time portal. Nobody had touched anything in that gas station in 20 years. There were still candy bars under the counter and cigarettes in the rack on the wall, fan belts and cans of oil all over the place. It was like a little museum. One particular photograph that I took of some garage doors in a little adobe garage down in Belen. This young man had painted a bucolic scene on the front of it. It was starting to get kind of weathered. That was Florencio Chavez who painted this. Well, he was a young man that had some mental disabilities. He was hearing impaired. So he painted a lot of buildings around Valencia County. And apparently the family had no record of these. He died when he was 33. The family and I made contact, and of course I was happy to give them copies of the prints because that's the only record they had of his work. And that building now is an auto parts store. I mean, the building is gone. The site is an auto parts store. The Joy Drive-In marquee. I was just driving through Barino, one of my creative routes, in that produce truck, and I saw it, and it's one of those things I called a brake slammer. Just slammed on the brakes, whipped out the camera, grabbed one frame, and drove off. It says to me so much about New Mexico, with the Spanish language films, and just really, it draws me in whenever I look at it. I could almost see all the local Spanish families in their 1930s and 1940s cars driving in there for their weekend treat. In the time when these buildings went up, I think there was also almost a necessity for people to design their own ways of surviving. There weren't a lot of jobs. So, well, let's go open a store and we'll sell some groceries, or we'll sell beer or whatever, and we'll make our money that way. So, yeah, there was a definite sense of independence. The people in the small villages, they are a reflection of these places. That's where the villages came from. That is their history. And these places say as much about the people behind them as they do about my response to the buildings.
Biologist Andrea Martin uses her science skills to bring nature to life.
I tell stories by cutting designs in paper with an X-Acto knife. My name is Andrea Martin, and I'm a paper cutter. I've been drawing all my life. I love drawing, and I really like representational art, and I like the very graphic nature of the black and white, but I also really like the challenge of looking at something and saying, well, how can I make that into a paper cut? You know, how can I make that two-dimensional? You know, how can I show something without color? You have to kind of trick the eye into seeing something that's not really there. I want the fox to look like he's hidden behind these leaves, and I think I can do that by making hatch marks to show his fur, and that'll make the leaves stand out and look like he's behind it. The piece that I'm currently working on is a piece for the Roseville Library. I was asked to do a paper cut of a garden that would show the different plants and animals that are found in their garden at the library. I spent a long time researching what plants and animals were native to Minnesota. For example, what kind of rabbits live in Minnesota? What kind of grasshoppers was I seeing? So in some ways I wish I could just cut a grasshopper, without doing the research, but I actually enjoy that part as much as I do the paper cutting. When I first went to college, I had to decide between being a biology major or an art major, and I chose biology. I'm really glad that I did take the biology classes. It taught me observation. It taught me to see the world a little bit differently, and I think that this shows up in my paper cutting. It shows up in the details. I love the details in my work. I had my own scientific illustration business, so I drew graphs and I drew pictures of animals and things like that in pen and ink. Then I became a teacher, taught science for many years, always incorporating art somehow into the work I was doing with the kids in science. It's really important as a scientist to observe. I do a lot of daily walking and I look at the animals and plants and how they're interacting with each other. I look for sources of water for animals. I look at patterns in nature. Patterns in nature really fascinate me. And so if I'm out and I see a leaf that has been eaten by a Japanese beetle, I look at that and say, oh, that's a paper cut. It's a beautiful. People don't like Japanese beetles. They're invasive species, but they actually make beautiful leaf paper cuts. The paper cutting that I do, I think, have some messages sort of hidden in them. I mean, I'm interested in putting a smile on people's faces, but I'm also interested in people getting messages about how the environment is affecting the animals. I did a piece called View from the Other Side, and it shows a woodpecker all by itself in dead trees. In the background, you can see the city. I was thinking about loss of habitat for animals when cities are built and expand especially, and what animals would survive and what wouldn't. My next paper cut, I'm interested in doing something along the lines of global warming. And so I'm planning images and things that will be on this paper, but also looking at color in my work too, and how I can use that to an advantage, to get my message across better. But I also like just pretty pictures.
Artisan Steve Cinnamon shares how a 150-year-old blues instrument lifted him out of depression and into a different kind of blues, the cotton pickin' kind.
Its taste is acquired. Its aroma distinct. But who knew that the cigar's container could create a sound so rich?
This goes back a good 150 years to the deep, deep South. When people wanted their music, everyone loves music. The first one was called the diddley bow. And obviously, if you turn those two words around, you get Bo Diddley, which is one of the most famous blues players ever.
Steve Cinnamon doesn't smoke cigars, and he claims he's no skilled guitarist. But he's an admirer and artisan of the cigar box guitar.
So they wanted their music, and they didn't have the money, they didn't have the means, they didn't have the instruments. And they basically took a pole, a cigar box, and a piece of wire off a screen door, strung it together, ran their finger up and down it, and all of a sudden they had music.
Making something from nothing, a resourceful trait that Steve appreciates. Perhaps because he knows a little bit about it himself.
We came down here for the American dream. Retired, new pretty bride on the beach. We got married at sunset. It was everything. We had the boat, we had the cars, we had the house.
Someone to make a couple to join you. Is that okay with you?
At first, times were good for Steve and his wife, Sue Ann. Then, like many others, the recession hit, crushing their comfortable life.
We lost everything, basically. And the American dream became an American nightmare, unfortunately. And it resulted in myself having a heart attack.
His condition was treated, but it triggered more distress.
He went into a deep depression. He was full of fear, and he just wasn't himself. I don't know what it feels like because I never had a heart attack. So he was just not the man that I married.
With the help of friends and family, Steve slowly started to improve. The turning point, reconnecting with an old friend he hadn't seen in 45 years.
He called me one day, he says, I made a cigar box guitar. I said, what is that?
The curious instrument intrigued Steve. He wanted to learn more.
When I started doing the researching after that, I found out that the originals were either 1-string or 3-string.
So he started tinkering with the concept. Friends who saw his early work were impressed.
I made one. Someone saw me making it and said, I want one of those. I'll pay you for it. And that was the beginning.
And the end of something else.
I gradually started to see a change in him. I saw that spark, that life start to come back, and I started to see the man that I married.
Something about building those cigar box guitars was therapeutic.
Yeah, I have to credit this whole guitar venture that I'm on as part of the reason I snapped out of the depression. It gave me a feeling of worth, creativity, and it was a lot of fun.
Interest in his recycled riffs began to rise, and not just from musicians.
There's a lot of people that buy them from me and just put on the wall as a wall hanger. This is kind of like for the guy that has everything.
And just like that, Cotton Pickin' Blues was born.
It's definitely an instrument, and it's definitely a piece of art.
Steve makes both acoustic and electric versions. With so many different boxes, the possibilities are endless.
The best part about it is that I could do whatever I want, because there's no right way, there's no wrong way. So it gives me total creative license as long as it sounds good.
To accessorize his guitars, Steve likes to think outside the box.
The resonator sound, this is basically a bathtub drain, believe it or not. As far as the corners go, I picked them up at, one of the big hardware department stores. The frets are actually finishing nails. I just buzz off the edges so no one gets scratched, and they're perfect. It's real homemade. I try to keep it as homemade as possible.
Put the creation of a craftsman in the hands of a gifted guitarist, and the results are heavenly.
I would sooner build the guitars and watch them be played by people that really know what they're doing, actually in amazement.
Ironic that the heart attack that could have killed Steve actually saved him.
I mean, I'll keep making these things until, God forbid, 100 years from now when they close the box. And then I'll take one with me. You never know who you meet.
Arnold Alanis is inspired by the climate and seasons in his new home, Wisconsin.
like to keep the background coming through the front so it isn't so solid. Hence, I leave some spaces in between.
He's known for his delicate landscapes of Wisconsin's North Woods, but Arnold Alaniz grew up under the hot Texas sun, miles away from what has become his favorite subject.
When I grew up, it was in South Texas, along the Gulf Coast. And my idea of landscape were sand dunes, cactus, palm trees. When I received a scholarship to come to Madison to attend the University of Wisconsin, I came face to face with maple trees and oaks and beautiful foliage that changed color in the fall. I saw snow and trees that, evergreens that we only had at Christmas. They were cut down and decorated with, lights and ornaments, but here they were in the wild. I was so impressed that I think to this day I still paint those images because of that wonderful change of season and color. And the woods, I had no woods where I lived. There was scrub grass and mesquite. These are just the preliminary undertones to the piece. It's going to change dramatically over time. But I'm creating the atmospheric look to it, the softness of the background. It has to go from the very beginning. It's just something you just don't put on in one coat. My pieces are inspired by life, by scenes that I see. Especially lately, I've been doing long walks in the woods and in some of the parks here in Door County, and coming upon scenes that I normally would never have seen, and those have kind of found their way into my work. I work primarily in the studio. Even though I get ideas from nature, I'm a studio artist. My work is a combination of large, broad areas of color and detail, and mostly detail. And those are hard to do in the field, so I don't really consider myself a plein air painter as such.
Alaniz is known for his landscapes with their soft, gentle treatment of light and subtle gradations of colors.
The large, flat areas of color take the longest because they're layers upon layers, one over the other, and they have to dry. I work with acrylic, and because of that, the layer that lays on top of the one below becomes transparent. You can see the colors coming through if you work it thin enough. So it gives you the glow, that atmospheric look that is so prevalent in my work. That's the hardest, to lay down the tones. And then, of course, the detail, which many people think is the hardest, but to me, I enjoy that. It's like therapy. That's the part that takes the longest, the building of the tone and the branches, etc., and the little details, the leaves.
Alaniz drew his inspiration from artists of another time.
I think some of the strongest influences during my education were in the work of the Hudson River School artists and also the work of the French Impressionists for their colors. I think some of the landscapes of Turner and some of the School of Impressionism made strong impressions on me, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. And I think perhaps those are some of the strongest influences. Not so much artists living in my time. My work is somewhat romantic, and when I was in school, that wasn't the in thing to be painting. But I survived it, and I came out doing the same thing I love to do and making a go of it.
For Alaniz, each work is a delicate blending of realism, romanticism, and impressionism that reveals the tranquil, reflective side of nature.
I've always tried to convey the feeling of awe and kind of solitude that I get in the scenes that I paint. So they're the all-inspiring thing to me, and I use my technique to meet those ends. So I'd have to say it's the scene itself or the image. If it has a message, it's to make people stop and look at the everyday things we take for granted. Scenes that I paint are not necessarily sensational or extraordinary. They're very mundane in their own way, but yet the way I present them gives them a certain importance, a certain majesty. Even the simplest trees have a certain dignity about them that I think is inherent And it makes people say, oh wow, you know, look at what I see every day and appreciate it more. And that's part of my message in my work.
Next time on Colores, New Mexican Stacy Neff talks about the feminine aspect of nature and how the sense of gesture is inherent in her chosen medium of blown glass.
You're working with gravity and heat, so the glass is falling always down. That's predictable, and it's always getting more solid as it cools.
After an almost fatal car accident, artist Karen Richardson changes from glass blowing to creations made of found objects.
What interests me about natural materials, there's such a magnificence. There's this wonder and this awe, and it's always changing. It's never the same.
Master glassmaker Eric Meek of the Corning Museum of Glass shares his process.
If you're a professional, you have to be able to work with the glass to control the outcome of the glass. So I would say for myself personally and for most of the glassmakers here at the Corning Museum, you have a very clear picture of what you want to make and you control the glass to create that object.
Until next time, thank you for watching.